Welcome to today's, this morning's session. My name's Simon McKell and I'll be chairing our session on policing today, two-tier justice. So these accusations of two-tier policing are really popular today, and so popular that we have our own Prime Minister being called two-tier Keir, which is one of my favourites. The Attorney General, Lord Hermer, rejected these allegations of two-tier justice as frankly disgusting. So to get their views and to explore this issue further, we have been joined by a fantastic panel of speakers, and I'll introduce them in the order that they're speaking in. So on my left, we have Gittos, criminal lawyer, author and director of Freedom Law Clinic. Then we have, sat next to him, Peter Bleksley, writer, broadcaster and former detective and fellow Queen's Park Rangers supporter. Had to be said, sorry. And we have on my right, Hardeep Singh, journalist, author and deputy director of Sikh organisations. And then sat next to Hardeep is Sarah Phillimore, barrister and co-founder of Fair Cop. So, Luke, you have 5 minutes to give your views. Thank you.
I did that terrible thing of rewriting my speech at the last minute, which you should never do. But I was compelled to, on the basis of what I saw travelling home on the tube last night. I opened my mobile phone, opened Twitter, and I saw some footage from a police interview that had taken place, and a result of a report from the Telegraph newspaper who had obtained this footage. And in the footage are two police officers, and they ask the person they are interviewing the following question: "What's that around your neck?" The person being interviewed says, "It's a Star of David." The police officer says, "Why are you wearing that?" And he says, "Because I'm Jewish." And the police officer says, "Do you think that wearing that at a pro-Palestinian demonstration risked antagonizing the protesters?" And the solicitor who is accompanying this interviewee pauses for a consultation and raises some very mild-mannered concerns about the line of questioning, saying, is it really right that police officers should be questioning someone about an item of religious dress? And then the interview proceeds. Effectively, the allegation against this man was that he'd gone to a pro-Palestinian demonstration wearing a Star of David, and that was antagonizing the protesters supporting Palestine, and that therefore there was a possibility that he had committed a criminal offence. I had a very mild-mannered speech prepared, in which I was going to explore some of the historical trends that I see unfolding within policing that I've been writing about for a long time. But I think now is not the time to be that mild-mannered. Now is the time for anger. We have to say that this ends now. Not only is this not acceptable in contemporary Britain, not only should this be an insult to the legions of officers who perform their job well, this is an affront to everything that our justice system should be about. And if we approach this issue in the kind of cool and calm and collected way that many of us on this panel have been doing in recent years, then we risk allowing injustice to persist. And I think one tendency within the police today is that they don't see how their power affects real people. They don't care about knocking on someone's door, dragging them to a police station, interviewing them, putting them on bail, restricting their liberty, only to then say, oh no, actually you've committed no crime. They don't see that as an intrusion. They see it as sort of a necessary bureaucratic step that they have to take in order to do their job. And I think at the heart of this, contemporary police forces have been so divested of authority, and we can talk about how this has happened, that really they've become an ugly bureaucratic machine. An ugly bureaucratic machine that sadly, in many cases, is capable of doing real evil to real people. I'll give you just a couple more practical examples of how this plays out. I'm not betraying any confidences here, but over the years I've seen people pulled in and arrested, sat down and interview for the language that they use in emails, for using or expressing particular opinions that people find offensive. This is simply no longer unusual. It's a very normal part of what the police are doing. And it has a real impact on the lives of those people affected, obviously. It has a real impact on the rest of us because we've seen plummeting rates of actual crime being solved. The police do seem to be more focused on solving speech crime than they are on solving real crime. And the outcome is that we live now in a society where the police's role has been totally divested of its public good. And that's a real problem. I think we can also talk about these instances where we have, as a society, dragged police through the mud completely unnecessarily. We do defile the institution of the police, and we do risk undermining or the possibility of recreating a police force that might actually do its job well. We want to encourage young people to be police officers, and when young people do step forward with a sense of public duty, we should celebrate that. But we need to have a very serious rethink of the foundations of what the police are doing, why they're doing it. Because in this particular moment, the very idea that someone can be put in a police cell, handcuffed, interviewed about an item of religious dress should terrify us all. And so my call today, I think, yes, be calm and collected. Yes, be rational about why these things are happening, but don't allow them to pass without righteous anger. Thank you.
Peter.
I unashamedly love those police officers who sign up to nick bad people and will run towards that gun-wielding, knife-wielding, sword-swinging, machete-chopping lunatic. Because most of us here wouldn't. My street fighting days are long behind me. I haven't got a warrant card in my back pocket, and confronted with one of those situations I just mentioned, I don't know what I would do today. But sadly, tragically, dangerously, the real important elements of policing have been stripped away and discouraged. Most cops of my generation and of more recent years will tell you that the two most precious assets you can possess as a police officer is, number one, common sense, and number two, the ability to communicate. Now, those things were treasured, valued in policing years gone by, and they are rapidly being diminished. And why are they being diminished? Well, policing has replaced leaders with managers. And it's a very important matter. Thank you. Thank you. Managers that can climb that greasy pole of promotion, that will speak the ideological, pseudo-intellectual claptrap that gets spewed out of the College of Policing and the National Police Chiefs Council. And it is complete ideological nonsense. The leaders of men and women and non-binary police officers, however they want to identify, the former police leaders of years gone by had the experience, were valued, were respected, And if they weren't valued and respected, some of them mysteriously fell down flights of stairs. I don't know how that ever happened to them. And I couldn't, of course, possibly condone violence in any way, shape or form. Let me make that perfectly clear. But there was a more collective sense. Common sense ruled, leaders led, and now they manage. But to get back to the core of the debate, if I may, in the last 2 minutes and 20 seconds that I've got, about two-tier, I've always said there are inconsistencies in policing, long before this two-tier expression became a thing. And you'd expect that. In fact, in days of old, inconsistencies were welcomed and seen as a strength. And what do I mean by that? Well, if a police officer who's brand new out of training school gets a phone call to go to a local park where a bunch of kids are misbehaving, that brand new police officer, with their shiny boots, their head full of recently learnt legislation, which they don't learn anymore, might deal with those errant youths in a different way. For example, he might need to make some arrests to get his or her arrest record up. Fine, as long as it's lawful and the evidence is there, no problem. A 25-year veteran police officer who gets the same phone call to the same park to deal with the same kids might not like the paperwork and might feel that there's actually a bit more to be had by leading one of those kids home and having a chat with their parents. Neither are necessarily wrong. Both might end up with a decent kind of outcome, because a brand new cop, when he's dragged a young kid into the police station anyway, would, in days of old, have been putting him in front of an experienced sergeant, and then there would be an inspector. So what the 25-year cop did might be achieved, but through a slightly different means and a different route. So those kind of inconsistencies existed. They were embraced. They were seen as a strength of policing. But now, of course, thanks to ministers, repeated ministers, how many Home Secretaries have we had in the last hour? I don't know, about a decade, right? How many have we had? And so many of these stupid, naive, brainless politicians impose tick-box policing on our police. And tick-box policing is damaging because it rules out discretion. And discretion is a very, very important asset to a police officer. I've run over time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Hardeep.
So I'm going to follow suit with Luke and sort of change what I was going to do initially. And I wanted to show you something that would likely get you arrested. And I'm going to pull it. If you...
I'll hold it.
I think that's the right way up. There's a very sorry, beg your pardon. There's a very brave lady on the front row who has been arrested and de-arrested for holding that sign. It's a perfectly legal sign, as far as many of us would be concerned. Now, regrettably, I haven't got the booming voice of Peter, and I haven't got the ability to say pseudo-intellectual claptrap like he did. But I totally agree with him. It's an honour to be back at the battle. And I will be delving into sort of our understanding of how impartial policing or justice works kind of in contemporary Britain. Now, I'm not a lawyer. With lawyers here, I'm not a policeman, although I still like watching Columbo. What I am is a journalist who's written about and stood up for free speech. And my last volume was addressing the issue of two-tier policing and what's been going on over the last few years. Now, in my opinion, one of the key questions that all of us need to ask ourselves here today is two-tier policing just a cliche, an insult, just to signify distrust in the establishment, or does it rightly reflect concern when the balance of guilt or innocence is tilted towards identity, justice will not be served? Now, in my latest report, it had a very long title, The Many Tiers of British Justice, when identity politics and progressivist causes override impartial policing. I mean, I'm probably better off just calling it two-tier care, really. It focuses in on the terrible events last summer post-Southport. What I observed, and many people observed, is the political rhetoric was tough, and the state used what I'd say is like a sledgehammer effect to deal with the rioting. Starmer spoke directly to the rioters. He said, "You will regret this. Action will be taken." And he described what had happened as far-right thuggery, and that a standing army would be in place to deal with the rioters. Now, that framing of far-right thuggery was proven to be false later on by an official report, and that's important. Meanwhile, the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police was again using tough rhetoric. "You haven't got away with it. We are coming for you." So no one is saying that tough action wasn't required, but I think the issue is when you compare what happened in Southport to what happened in Hare Hills, which is a suburb of Leeds, and you compare what happened in Bordesley Green, which are counter-protests in Birmingham, there is a different policing approach. Now, just to illustrate what that looks like. So in Hare Hills, Leeds City Council issued a statement in partnership with the members of the Roma and Romanian community a day after the rioting, praising their contribution to, quote, "the diversity and richness of the Hare Hills." In Bordesley Green, despite journalists, and including a female, being intimidated, and a white man outside a pub being attacked, I mean, his liver was reportedly lacerated, there was a lack of police presence, despite one of the biggest police stations in Birmingham just being down the road. Now, unlike Southport, this is the other real issue we have here. Hare Hills and Bordesley Green were treated as community matters. The police went to community leaders, they went to business leaders to get intelligence prior to the disorder breaking out. But that same advocacy isn't in place for the white working class. So that, for me, indicates a bias in all of these things. Now, on sentencing, the Southport protesters, the disorder broke out on 30th of July. The first people were sent to prison a week later. Justice for the other protesters was a bit more delayed, and people will know about the case of the Labour councillor who said far-right activists' throat should be cut, and he was not found guilty more than a year on. So this takes me to Lucy Connolly, the social media cases. So she got 31 months for a post on X. Paedophiles and rapists get lesser sentences. And in another case, and this is quite interesting, there's a woman who went on Facebook, posted something, quite unreasonable actually, but and it was right for her to go to prison for 15 months. She talked about blowing up a place of worship with the adults inside. But contrast that with a case just a year prior to that, where an academic who was investigated by the police for talking about blowing up a Jewish Labour movement meeting. She was a retired professor. She apologised, of course, deleted the tweet, but the CPS decided not to charge her. So ordinary people see that disparity as an issue, I would say. Now, there's lots of themes that we'll address. I'll be very brief because I don't have long, but the themes I think we need to consider in this debate is, one is a hierarchical policy approach when it comes to different faith communities on issues around hate crime. The way religious and racial sensitivities impacted justice for victims of sexual grooming gangs, I think, is a real big issue when it comes to two-tier policing. And finally, I'd like to talk about with you guys is the now infamous two-tier sentencing guidelines, where the Sentencing Council, this Quango, was trying to introduce a two-tier sentencing approach. Now, fortunately, that was kiboshed thanks to emergency legislation. So in conclusion, I think everyone should be treated equally before the law, but the perception as to whether that's the case or not has been seriously eroded over the years. There's many examples of where identity politics and progressivist causes have trumped impartial policing, and it's time to reinstate equality for all citizens, regardless of their politics, religion, or identity grouping. Thank you.
Sarah.
Hello, I'm co-founder of Fair Cop. I thought it might be useful to try and frame this debate within the narrative of what Fair Cop have been trying to do, just to talk briefly about what's been working, what hasn't been working, and what do we do about that? And that's where I'd really welcome suggestions from the audience, because the loss of trust and confidence in the police is going to do significant damage to the rule of law, and in turn that is going to erode and corrode our democracy. This is really serious. So just a quick whiz through the chronology. In 2019, Harry Miller was visited at his place of work by a police officer to check his thinking. Fair Cop was then born, and our strategy was catch and kill, more elegantly known as lawfare. We thought, well, all we can do is take these obviously unlawful policing decisions and challenge them. Harry did, and he won in the Court of Appeal in 2021. And we got non-crime hate incidents put back in their box, and the police were told, there was parliamentary guidance, you've got to use your common sense, that key virtue, and you've got to look at this through the lens of Article 10. So, brilliant, we thought. Excellent, sorted. This year, Lindsay Smith had to take Northumbria Police to court for abject breach of their statutory duty to be impartial, their uniformed chief constable marching under Progress pride flags, uniformed police officers posing with signs saying "TERFs and racists be afraid." When it got to court, the defence was apparently Lisa Jardine is gay and therefore she knows what she's doing. Barely a couple of weeks after that, my own police force, Wiltshire, sent its own chief constable in uniform to Swindon Pride wearing a Progress Pride badge. I'm now taking Wiltshire Police to court in judicial review. Harry, as you may have read, I think in the Telegraph yesterday, his action against the Independent Office of Police Complaints has just been launched because they too take to the streets, marching under the flag of a contested political ideology. So where's your complaint going to go? So we have a bit of a problem, although it's obviously great fun bringing these cases and winning. It's been 6 years now and the police are still not obeying the law. So that raises two immediate questions. Has catch and kill, has lawfare been a failure? If it hasn't been an outright failure, why hasn't it worked as we hoped it would? My answer to the first question is it hasn't been a failure. I met Harry a couple of nights ago and I said to him, what am I going to say? Speaking at the Battle of Ideas, if someone says, look, you've been doing this for 6 years, what have you achieved? It's been a bust, hasn't it? And he said, no, it hasn't failed, because what we've given people is the platform and the courage to laugh at this. And he's absolutely right, because that echoes what Orwell says. If you reveal the absurdities of fascists, you make it easier to reduce their power. The reason why no British police or military unit has goose-stepped on the streets of this country is because we would laugh at them. So I'm really glad I spoke to Harry, because I was feeling quite despondent. We haven't achieved what we wanted to, but we have achieved something really important. I mean, the difficulty we've got is the law about malicious speech, alarm, harassment, distress. It is a bit of a rag bag, but it should work. It does attempt to impose boundaries on police action. If it is seen through the lens of Article 10, it should work and it should protect us. But the obvious reason why it doesn't work is that I am afraid, and I echo all credit to those police officers who put their lives on the line, who die to keep us safe. All credit to them. But then they are now being made to be the dancing monkeys of a particular political ideology, which is based on protecting victims' perception of themselves as victims, but only a couple of groups get to join that hallowed ground. Women, for example, are not victims whose perception matters. Men who say they are women, however, are. Thank you. So the worst offenders and the worst problem that we deal with are that small group of trans-identifying men who have made the police their private militia. They orchestrated the arrest of Graham Linehan in September, which was a bit of an own goal because that gathered international attention about the failures of our police force to protect freedom of speech. But the sad irony is, and I have to come back to it in terms of talking about failure, we are now in a worse position than we were when Harry took action. We've dealt with non-crime hate incidents. If you look at the Home Office recording rules, it's very clear. You've got to use your common sense. You've got to think about this. So what was the police's response to that? They started recording incidents as crimes. And they didn't tell the people they recorded, and they didn't investigate. And they only found out, this is Harry Miller and Helen Joyce, through other means. So this is what we're dealing with now, and I strongly urge any of you to check with your local force what is recorded against you, because they seem to have stopped recording incidents, because that's too much like hard work, and they are now recording crimes. So where do we go from here? Do we just keep plugging away, individuals taking on the state until we restore sanity? I can't see any other way forward. And that's all I can think of to do. But if there's any more suggestions from this audience, then I'm all ears, because it's obviously expensive and it's exhausting and it's wrong. Individuals should not have to be doing this. But at the moment, I see no other choice.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. So we'll go out to questions, and then we'll ask the panel to respond.
It's not two-tier crime up in Scotland, it's two-tier SNP. We have the same problem. And I think the kind of whittling away at them is getting noticed amongst the police at the bottom rather than the police at the top, because they don't come out and speak to us. So I do think we are chipping away slowly, and slowly it is going to be slow, but all we can do is keep chipping away at it.
Hello, thank you for doing this debate. I was wanting to ask, who does the panel think is the most to blame for the situation of two-tier police? Is it the police management? Is it the law courts and the ECHR and the Supreme Court? Is it the politicians? Who's the most to blame? And also, would organisations like Fair Cop, Peter Bleksley, Norman Brennan, would you consider working together to create a unified police-like structure to fight against the two-tier policing and other police matters?
Thank you. Great points. One thing that kind of concerned me about the panel is that it's quite unanimous. I don't see anyone presenting the opposite. I generally welcome my preconceptions being challenged, and there's never usually a shortage of someone willing to step up and defend the indefensible. It just seems utterly obvious that this is indefensible. No one was prepared to get up and defend this. What does that say about the state of the fact that this is continuing, progressing, being tolerated? I mean, I read a great article, I think it was by Alison Pearson, which she was describing the process she went through. And she said it was clear that I was doing nothing wrong. But it's also very clear that the process is the punishment, not the crime. And they can put you through months and months and months of agony and process and punishment and then go, well, you've done nothing wrong, off you go, no hard feelings. Should concern us all.
I just wanted to ask the panel, particularly Peter, about the issue of prioritisation. Why does the panel think that the police prioritise non-crime hate incidents and hate crime over actual crimes like stabbings, burglaries and assaults? Does the panel think they do it because it's easier to deal with?
Do the panel think that it might be useful if we could repeal all hate crime legislation, and that will enable the police to actually get on with looking for burglars, shoplifters, rapists, etc.?
My main interest is in recruitment and promotions. There's been a couple of police forces that got into a bit of trouble on this. I think Thames Valley is one, and Derbyshire, from memory, is another one. And I just wondered if these processes, from the panel's viewpoint, are continuing, or have they learnt their lessons from this? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if anybody in the panel would like to respond to one or all of those points, you're very welcome. So, Luke, if you want to go first.
Oh gosh, where to begin? Okay. To try and draw out some disagreement on the panel, I think everything Sarah's talked about and everything they're doing is extremely important, but I do worry about the limits of lawfare, and I worry about the impact of lawfare on the police. The police have experienced a massive influx of law and regulation over the last 3 decades, and that has been about increasing transparency about how they make their decisions. Much of that has been extremely good. But I think what Peter hints at when he talks about College of Policing guidance, the reams of managerial information that police officers have to abide by, the thing that really strikes me when I sit in an interview room with police officers now is that often they don't even understand why they're doing what they're doing. And they're doing it because they've been told to do it, and someone thinks they need to do it because the law tells them they have to do it, and someone above them thinks if we don't do it, we're going to get sued. And so the law has had a really corrosive impact on the ability of the police to exercise discretion and common sense. And that is a problem. It's a problem because the people at the management level have warped and perverse ideas about what they need to do in order to comply with the law. Now, Sarah's doing a fantastic job in setting them straight on that. But we need something broader. We need a social movement that pushes back against this at the level of the streets, to put it more bluntly. We need the public to be outraged about this. Because it's only if we generate genuine public anger and push back and make the strong point about the kind of police force that we want that we're going to get the kind of systematic change that we desperately need. Just one very further quick point and an example to throw out to the room. Does anyone know the name Martin Blake?
NX121.
Yes. So Martin Blake has been somewhat memory holed. He was a police officer that, in the line of duty, shot a drug dealer that was driving a car towards his fellow officers. Martin Blake was put on trial for murder and found not guilty very quickly, but is now facing gross misconduct charges. And it's precisely because of the influence of the law, of the threat of litigation, of the constant sense that the police officers have to be accountable to something which is external to policing, the courts, the managers, etc., that for a time there was a real risk that we wouldn't have any firearms officers in London, because firearms officers were very sensibly saying, I'm not going to operate under these conditions. I can't do my job. So yes, we need to react with real anger to these instances of two-tier policing, but the problem within the police is even more profound than that. There is something systematically wrong, and I think we need to align those concerns and consider them both very seriously.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I agree with what Luke is saying, but we need to be very clear what we mean by lawfare, and that's why our strategy was initially catch and kill. Of course, using the law to try and affect social change is cumbersome, expensive, and frankly stupid. But using the law to defend your fundamental freedoms is essential. If Harry hadn't done what he did, and I say now before you, men can't change sex, men aren't women, I would risk arrest and imprisonment. We cannot sit by when fundamental freedoms are challenged. And that's why I did wonder and worry if our lawfare has been a failure, because I'm now taking my own police force to court when there's already been a ruling telling them what they're doing is unlawful. But yet this can't act on its own. The bigger problem stemming from the Macpherson report, when yes, the Metropolitan Police were racist, when yes, they buggered up every chance they had to find the murderers of Stephen Lawrence. And the response was, right, well, we're going to take that responsibility out of your hands for deciding who's racist, and the victim will tell you. That inevitably has been hijacked by the mentally ill and the malicious. Michelle Burrows is a name I just want to mention because she was Miss B in Harry's case. She was described by the courts on the outer edge of reality. Sorry, I say he, and he's still going. So this is the problem. The policies coming down from the College of Policing are absolutely fettering police officers and being able to do their job. That has to change. But at the same time, we cannot just sit back and not act when fundamental freedoms are unlawfully taken from us. So I just hope what we're doing is going to affect that cultural change. But I agree, there's a real worry how this is going to impact on morale in the police, recruitment to the police, the operational effectiveness of the police. If the police go, we are screwed. We rely on a police force that we can trust and have confidence in. There's not many of them and they don't have guns. Once that trust is gone, then so is the rule of law and so is our democracy. This is really, really serious. So again, I would welcome any suggestions how we take that wider aspect of lawfare from the protection of fundamental rights into changing this ridiculous culture that we have victims who get to decide if they're victims and they tell us what to do. I would just say in terms of who's captured, I think happily for us, the higher courts are not captured. If you remember Kate Scottow, she was convicted for calling Stephanie Hayden a pig in a wig. And that was overturned on appeal. So the higher courts are not captured, and that is the hope that remains for us.
Thanks, Sarah. Peter.
First and foremost, Sarah, the work that you, Harry, and your colleagues do is heroic. It is important. So please don't give up. And if ever the pressure becomes so much that you want to drink, I live in London and I'll let me put my hand in my pocket. Right. There's a lot to rattle through, so I'll be as quick as I can. NX121, Sergeant Martin Blake, did the world a favour when he shot Chris Cabba dead. The world is a much better place without Chris Cabba in it. Last week, Whiskey 80, a firearms officer who shot a man called Jermaine Baker dead 10 years ago, who also stood trial for murder and was acquitted, finally had a gross misconduct hearing. Last week, 10 years, his life has been wrecked by that pathetic organisation, the Independent Office for Police Conduct. Whiskey 80 was found not to have committed gross misconduct. 10 years he waited for that, with his life turned upside down, as was the life of his family, his kids, and all of that. Utterly unacceptable. I had the gun nail under my fingernails. I used to carry a gun. I've been in those situations where you have to make a split-second decision whether to shoot or not. In my circumstances, I have fortunately never had to pull the trigger. But to those courageous people who do, they need to be treated far, far better than they are. Question, I think, from the front row, who's to blame? The last generation or two of senior police officers. They're to blame. They've been captured. It's their ideology. Or I could say they picked it all up at these wokey, fluffy, flaky, liberal, Marxist nonsense universities they've been to. And it probably has happened there. That's probably where they were captured. But they've brought that nonsense back to policing. And they do the front line such a huge, huge disservice. Shame on them.
Thank you. Hardeep.
Recruitment and promotion, it's been shown across various police services to be absolutely appalling. The recruitment, the vetting, the training, all way beneath what it should do. They threw the baby out with the bathwater when they stopped teaching police officers how to know the law in all its minutiae. So that when you're out there on the streets and somebody like an auditor now comes up to you, you know exactly what law you're enforcing. You know exactly what your powers are. You learnt it, para-fashion. You learnt it. And then guess what? And then guess what? Funnily enough, you take it out on the streets and then use those laws that you knew effectively. Repeal hate crime legislation. Well, hate crime legislation really is there as an aggravating factor to any crime that's been committed. I think that needs refining, and I think if hatred is an added factor to your crime committing, whether that be through faith, religion, whatever it is, yeah, go to prison for longer, mate.
There will be plenty of time to respond for a lot of it. So, yes, so just keep it going. We got it. You don't like the police. Leadership. We get that right. Hardeep.
Yeah, just wanted to pick up on a few of the points. So the two-tier SMP point from the lady on the front with the Union Jack T-shirt. You might have an NCHI recorded against your name with that T-shirt on. But what struck me was that the Scottish Hate Crime and Public Order Act doesn't have a dwelling offence. So conversations in your home, if you live in Scotland, aren't protected. So that kind of stood out. Now, who does, I think it was Darius, you said who does the panel think is to blame? I'd say part of the blame would be attributed to the College of Policing. Give you an example. I mean, NCHIs weren't something anyone voted for. It didn't go through Parliament. This is an invention of the College of Policing. Now, I'll give you an example of one of the most absurd NCHIs I've come across. Somebody put up a pair of soiled underpants on a washing line. It was reported to the police and it was recorded as a non-crime hate incident. I argue money laundry is a police issue, dirty laundry isn't. Now, there was a gentleman who talked about the uniformity of the panel's opinions, and for me, it's quite nice to be in a place where people do agree with some of what I say. I was in a yoga class, came out of it. I had an opinion a few years ago about how Keir Starmer had thrown Rosie Duffield under the bus because it's not right. He said that to say only a woman has a cervix or something along those lines. And a woman behind me referred to me as a cis male TERF. I didn't have a dictionary. I didn't know what that actually meant. Now, the comment on burglaries, I think it was a gentleman at the back who talked about, why NCHIs, why not other things. Now, I wanted to give you a statistic. In the last 3 years, the police, and this was data from 2024, the police have failed to solve a single burglary in nearly half of neighbourhoods in England and Wales. That is bread and butter policing. That's what people want to see dealt with, not some hurty feelings on social media. I think needs a complete overhaul. And overall, I think the problem, and I'll be very brief, the problem, and it's been hinted at already, all of this came into place after the Macpherson report. It was all very well-intentioned. Racist crime, people were reluctant to report it. It's gone to very different characteristics. And the problem is when subjective feelings are replaced with something that I think is a little bit important called evidence.
Thank you. OK, let's go out for another round of questions.
I work in the criminal justice system. And the key thing for us is all about discrimination. Are we discriminating? So, when the obsession is racism, I think it really is very difficult. So the mention of the sentencing guidelines for pre-sentence reports, I mean, that happens anyway because of the Equalities Act. So someone who from an ethnic minority, that they will get a pre-sentence report, which may mitigate for them and reduce their sentence. And the Met Police are seen as institutionally racist. So, whilst we are obsessed with ensuring that people are treated equally, it is very, very difficult. And I think the blame is, at the Home Office, at universities, the training that I'm getting, it all needs to stop.
I'm almost embarrassed to admit I'm a former police detective. So, sorry, guys. So, I know. So a bit more context about how we've got to where we are, which I don't think has quite been captured. Police officers are actively incentivised to come after the public for just complete nonsense. So it started in the late 90s. If you want to go into a specialist role or promotion, you have to go through an internal interview. They rejigged it round about the turn of the millennium, and all of a sudden it was HR leading it, and all the questions were about, give me an example of when you've tackled racism, sexism within the police service. I'm not green enough to think there weren't police officers who were racist, but it's not like they were goose-stepping up and down the parade room, So what we started circulating sort of sample answers to get through boards. So then the job side said, no, this is not good enough. You've got to actively put it in your PDRs, record the evidence in it of what you've done. So we had situations where police officers were being disciplined for referring to current buns instead of breasts as sexist gendered language. Of course, they scraped the bottom of the barrel. Police officers turned on each other, particularly the ambitious ones. So then the business side looked at it and went, look, some of these examples are a bit silly. So now we're going to expand it so that, I need examples of when you've done this in your day-to-day policing against the public. They are actively incentivising police officers to do this. Above and beyond that, they've created the DEI Inquisition, for want of a better word. If you don't do this, so if there's a police officer takes a complaint around some nonsense, which really shouldn't be recorded, it's like, I better record it because I don't want to face the DEI Inquisition. And then it goes through senior managers who are spineless, who should be saying, bin this, Nobody wants the Inquisition. So that's how we've got where we are, partly how we've got to where we are today. It's outrageous.
Thank you.
I'm Yasmin, Justice for Yasmin campaign. I'm a victim of crime and I've been threatened with arrest. I really wanted to say, first of all, and applaud each member of the panel for giving us such an excellent insight. Sarah, you've been repeatedly saying, hey, can you give some suggestions? I just wanted to give you these suggestions. When I look around me, I think, first of all, capture the youth, get the youth. They're not here. They're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, and their moral outrage today can deliver in spades. Second, did you know when you try and get legal fees, it's at least 400 plus VAT an hour. So there's lots of no win, no fee. And also, I myself am going after Met Police, and I think we need to hold Sadiq Khan accountable. So maybe you deploy, Sarah, those of us who can challenge him in some of these open debates. That's all I wanted to say, but keep up the brilliant hard work.
I would agree that lawyers are phenomenally expensive, and that's the other form of two-tier justice, whether you can pay for legal representation or not. I had experience of this in 2020, when admittedly the police were under enormous political pressure to keep the population compliant, and it was to do with protesting. And I could afford a lawyer, and despite the fact that some police had utterly made up evidence against me, the case went away because I had a very tenacious lawyer. But all the other people I was protesting with, I would suggest I was the only person in that particular Venn diagram who protested, who was quite bloody-minded and who could afford it. And everyone else was hit with fines and things.
Just to comment on lawfare, which I think needs to be understood as not just the bringing of proceedings against organisations, it's the bringing of proceedings with a political agenda. And that's why it's so pernicious and corrosive. And so and normally the political agenda is all around the politics of identity, particularly a particular view on race, sex and gender, a left wing, a sort of woke perspective. And that's been really destructive of all these institutions and basically the rule of law, which of course is defined essentially by the absence of politics. Now, what I think Sarah and others are doing is not lawfare, because all of their very worthwhile and successful campaigns have a very different intention. Namely, it's to get politics out of these organisations. So it means that we don't want the police officers supporting Pride. We don't want them entering into these tick-box exercises so that they can say they have equality of outcomes. So it's fundamentally different in its approach. So I'm very much against lawfare, but I'm very much in favour of all those people like Sarah and a great many others, some of them are in this room, who are doing their best to get these organisations to just do their jobs properly.
I believe there's two problems, that the police are treating rightful free speech as hate crime and hate crime as rightful free speech. When Jewish students on campuses are threatened and harassed, nothing is done and they're told they have to deal with it, and maybe they should think why they're being treated that way. When someone stands up to terror or wears a Star of David on their own streets in London, they are antagonising, and the government's allowing terror on our streets. How are we meant to stand up to this? How are we meant to have faith in our police force if we are not safe on our streets?
So I've been detained by the police for holding the sign Hamas are terrorists under Section 5, causing alarm, distress and harassment. And I was asking the police, how does my sign, which is the UK law, cause alarm, distress and harassment? And they were unable to answer this. And then I was let go. And then on Saturday, that was actually my sign. So I went there to stand in solidarity with the Jewish community because of what happened in Manchester. My sign simply says, "We stand with Britain's Jews." I was herded out there, manhandled by 2 officers. And then I was taken out and they said, "You can't be here." I said, "Why? Under what section? Under what law?" He says, "You're provoking them." And I said, "How does my sign provoke anyone in Britain?" And then, because they couldn't remove me because of this conversation, they then accused me of assaulting the officer. Both of my hands One of my hands was with the sign, and the other hand was taken by the police officer. So there was no physical way that it was even possible. So how do we challenge this? You said that we should challenge this on the street. How do we challenge this on the street? Because we face this quite a lot. And part of our fight organisation, many of us have been arrested, detained, and just moved away because we're causing them too much trouble.
Thank you. Right. So we'll let the panel respond to some of those questions, then we'll go back out again. So, Peter.
I'll give you a story from many years ago when I was policing a football match. I didn't police many football matches, and if ever I have a drink with you, I'll tell you why I didn't. It was a home game for one particular club, and an opposing fan and his mate were coming down the street. They'd had a booze, and they were overtly wearing the colours of the home team. Right? I stopped them. I said, look, fellas, you can either cover that up and take that scarf off, right, or walk the other way, which will take you to the away stand, or you can carry on going down this road and you're probably going to get your head kicked in, right? So I'm trying to stop you from getting hurt. I'm trying to stop a disturbance being created. I'm trying to prevent anybody innocently being hoovered up into what would be a very unpleasant situation. So kindly, scarf off, in your pocket, zip your jacket up, keep the trap shut, and if you go left there, left at the end and left again, you'll get to the away end. They fortunately did what I asked of them. If we rewind to the lady or the man with the Star of David, if I was policing today, if it was you and your sign, I would say, look, there's a load of anti-Semitic, Jew-hating, horrible bastards over there, right? And I really don't want you to get hurt. I really don't. I have your best interests. If you stand here, you can hold your placard because I can create a distance, I can create a safe space, you can hold it, you can do whatever you want that is within the bounds of the law. I certainly wouldn't want to be nicking you. I would want to create a situation where you could be seen, your words could be heard as a counter-protest which was safe for everyone, that I'd ensure there was plenty of coppers to stop the mob coming after you as well. Common sense policing. But one more quick thing, because it cut across the question from that young man at the back about priorities, it cut across what the lady from the criminal justice system said, and it cut across what the gentleman who spoke about lawfare. And that is priorities. Policing was actually born out of priorities because there was a need to have a police service, force, as it was in those days, to get them on the streets to quell disorder. That's how it was born. There will always be priorities, but there's a saying in policing, when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. As far as I'm concerned, the priorities and the communities that the police should engage with are thus. There are two communities with which the British police need to engage with. First of all, victims of crime. Give them a service, look after them, investigate those crimes promptly and professionally. And secondly, the other community is those who commit the bloody crimes. Right? Engage with them often, frequently, irritatingly, until they are off the streets. Strip out all this who's a priority because of the colour of their skin, because of their faith, because of their sexuality. It's all utter cobblers.
Thank you.
Victims and criminals.
Thank you. Hardeep.
How do you follow that? There's a lady at the back. I'll just pick off a few points. There was a lady at the back from the justice system who talked about the existence of pre-sentencing reports for ethnic minorities already. Now, I believe that I shouldn't be treated any differently because of my ethnicity or religion. If I commit a crime, I should be treated exactly the same as anyone else. Now, the ex-detective at the front who talked about the DEI Inquisition, I think part of the problem with all of this is that, and I was discussing this earlier, that with Sarah, that the law has created preferential treatment for some groups. You've got some police forces that are recording hate crime for goth and emos culture. You've got a lobby that was looking to include afro hair as a protected characteristic in the Equality Act. But there's many groups. What about people who are left-handed or people that are ginger like Prince Harry? These are all people with difference. So, what's happening is you've got certain groups that are giving protection and others are left out, which I think is not right. I think one other point, I appreciate the comment about the prohibitive cost of taking or defending yourself in legal actions. I was sued by a holy man for defamation who's based in the Punjab, sued me here in the High Court, and that was a very expensive affair. If it hadn't been for lawyers that took the case on a no-win, no-fee, I probably would have gone bankrupt. So I appreciate that comment at the back. The comment, I forget your name, but there's a barrister at the back there that had cleared his name with a horrendous case, but he made a very important point around proceedings being brought because of a political agenda. And I'd say there was a real tension in the law where the police have to deal with competing groups when it comes to the public sector equality duty. And that's a real problem when it comes to, say, for example, pro-trans groups and feminists, Islam and people who are critical of Islam. I think that tension we're going to see increasingly over the years.
Thank you, Hardeep. Sarah?
Yeah, that's really interesting in terms of what we can do. And I really value Peter's contribution because I can see that a man with a Star of David or a woman with a poster faced with literally thousands of people who want to hurt you is a really difficult situation for the police. But because of where we are now and they're being primed to see people in terms of different groups getting different protections, it's not coming out as protecting you, it's coming out as punishing you. And that, again, is corrosive. I like the suggestion. We've got to be more organised. I don't agree with John when he says this is just about getting people to do their job. No, this is about protecting fundamental human rights. And if Harry hadn't done what he did, none of us would be able to meet here and to talk. We would all be arrested. So, of course, we have to put the brakes on using law in a more cumbersome way to bring about social change. I like the suggestion, get a network of people who will go to public events and challenge people in positions of power. What we can do is restore the bulwark of our freedoms by this targeted lawfare. But yes, we've got to work more broadly and think outside the box and have events like this where there are not just people who are agreeing with us. It's those people who are responsible for the promotion of EDI and victim perception. And I need to remind you, you probably don't need reminding, this is in every single profession now. My profession, I'm a barrister, tried to impose on us an obligation to promote EDI. We fought it and we won, but it's not going to go away because the people leading my regulator say it is a moral imperative to enforce this. It carries no ideological freight. These people think they are right. It is like a religious cult. This isn't hyperbole. And I completely accept it isn't going to be ended by piecemeal legal actions. We do have to start thinking of coming together to restore exactly the kind of policing that Peter has just talked about. Because I could have trust and confidence in those police. I would want to cooperate with them. But if the police come knocking on my door now, I'd shut it. And once you've lost the middle-aged women, you haven't got much further to fall.
Thanks, Sarah. Luke.
I just wanted to make the case for bloody-mindedness because the contribution at the back and the contribution at the front touch on a similar issue, which is that, yes, lawfare, whatever you want to call it, is extremely important. But actually nothing is more powerful than just saying no and causing them trouble. I mean, you mentioned, what can we do because we are causing trouble? Well, that's the point. You have to cause trouble. Because causing trouble shows the world the injustice and shows the world the impact of the law in real life. And I wanted to talk about, very briefly, my client Jamie Michael, who I talk about all these free speech related events. Jamie was one of the people arrested in the aftermath of the Southport stabbings for making a video. He made a video about illegal immigration. He was charged with stirring up racial hatred. He was held in prison for 17 days. He waited for 7 months to have a trial, and his jury acquitted him in 17 minutes. But had he not taken the position that he did, which is to say no, which is to say not guilty, which is to say that I won't lie down and accept my punishment, he would have been convicted. He would have been jailed. He was facing a prison sentence of 7 years. These acts of defiance, your act of defiance at an Islamist demonstration, your act of defiance in saying not guilty, these deserve to be talked about. We need to talk about them a lot. And yes, if you are a rapist or a drug dealer, then my services are very expensive. However, we have ways of representing people who do courageous things for free. And I can tell you for sure, if you come into my office with a case like this or a case like yours, you'll not pay a penny.
I live in a community where police is no longer managing to deal with petty crime, shopping thefts, phone snatching. Children are being attacked on the way to school, taking their phones off. And at the same time, I live in an extremely diverse community, surprisingly working quite harmoniously, a mix of a Jewish community and a Muslim community and South American and Black and African and white people, where the police obviously has to achieve the balance of protecting the Jewish community, but also validating the concerns of the Muslim community. And at the same time, what is becoming very evident on both sides of a society which is very polarized is it's not just about the law. When we speak about incitement and hate speech and hate crime, it's about the interpretation of the law. So where is the clear line of how law is being interpreted? So all sides of society feel equally validated and feel that their human rights and free speech is protected.
Nigel Farage and others in the Reform Party have been quite outspoken about this idea of two-tier policing, two-tier justice. Robert Jenrick has recently called to abolish the Sentencing Council and the Judicial Appointments Commission. I would like to know what list of changes you think would be the priority to get some of this straightened out, and what confidence you have that a forthcoming reform government, if the polls are to be believed, will be able to enact some of these, and how long you think it would take for any meaningful change to happen.
This is one of the best panels I've ever attended at the Battle of Ideas. I found it very thought-provoking. Thank you. I just want to say something about guidance which keeps coming up. So when Harry Miller won his Court of Appeal case, the country then had to wait for various forms of guidance from the College of Policing and indeed from the Home Secretary. We've heard about the Sentencing Council guidelines. We know that the Supreme Court seems to have made quite a definitive ruling in the matter of binary sex under the Equality Act. Nonetheless, after the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land and possibly one of the most respected courts in the world, made that decision, we were told thereafter that the NHS and other public bodies and every organisation in the country would have to wait for guidance on the matter. So we're seeing a pattern here, I think, where the law is one thing, but the guidance and what the guidance says, which is issued from, as panellists have noted, organisations, quangos, bodies of individuals who have no accountability, who have no relationship as far as the public are concerned with Parliament. These quangos who issue guidance are basically operating another legal jurisdiction. And that is why I think we feel so acutely, all of us, no matter where we are in this battle, that there is a two-tier justice system, because we've actually got the law of the land on the one hand, and we've got quangos issuing guidance on the other. And it's the quangos that can be captured by various political actors to make sure that institutions follow their bidding, and the law just becomes impotent.
I'm sympathetic to, I think, pretty much 100% of the stuff I've heard in the room. That said, this is the battle of ideas, and this has actually just been a massacre. We are speaking to our own echo chamber. We're out of time now even to straw man what the other side might think. So in the spirit of perhaps addressing the issue of what needs to be done, the individual cases, fine, great, whatever. Keep going, brave people. But when the government came to power, the Attorney General gave a speech. It wasn't widely covered, and he said that this is the rule of law. And Britain's value is the rule of law, and this government will stand for the rule of law. And they will argue with everybody in this room that the law is being observed. And that actually, you lost the election, we're the government in power, and we're enforcing the law as is written and is interpreted by the courts. So if you want to address it, you've got to change the government of the day.
It's two questions, probably for Peter. When, or maybe the gentleman who was serving in the police is in the audience, when did things change that the police stopped acting to protect people and said, you're at risk, we need to take you out, you're the problem because this group of people want to attack you, so instead of dealing with the perpetrator, we're going to take the victim out of the situation? And secondly, when did it change that so many police now attend these events? So when Kate Scotto was arrested, there were 7 police officers turned up at her house on a Sunday morning when she was getting out the shower, 3 police cars outside in a cul-de-sac. Graham Linehan, I think there were either 3 or 5 officers. And I was at an event a few years ago where it was a private event, something to do with mermaids, it was a trans thing, and there were some lesbians there that offended the organisers, and they reported us to the police. And 9 police officers turned up on a Thursday night in the City of London to take 3 lesbians at an event. So I just want to know if you know when that changed.
So I'm currently doing research in managerial culture and how it's affecting our laws. And I find it very interesting that word managers keeps getting brought up time and time again. So my question for the panel is, who are these managers? What do they represent? And how is their culture directly affecting the decline in policing and the rise of two-tier justice?
Thank you. And Lady McGree.
So we can't change the government for another few years. So we need to go to the politicians. I think that the Home Secretaries in current and past and our MPs are getting a light ride on this, and we need to be actually amping up the political pressure. We have a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner in Norfolk who seems to think that there were various Supreme Court judgments which are necessarily making some people feel more vulnerable. And she's going to work with the Chief Constable to ameliorate the Supreme Court judgment. They don't understand the facts of the law, and they don't understand how they should operate their jobs. And it comes from the Home Office, and we need the Home Office sorted out, and we need the Home Secretary to be held to account for the way that her police officers are behaving.
So the comment about Farage, what should they do? Quite clear about this. Scrap non-crime hate incidents. Just get rid of them, scrap them. And I defer to Anna's legal expertise and eloquence, but I think one of the things that I've noticed, and I think Harry Miller has mentioned this in the past, is that the police oath changed in around 2002, and it included the words human rights. So what that means, when you hear the statement trans rights are human rights, those human rights become like a proxy for the law. And that's why you're seeing the police engaging in this. And I think that's why there's been a bit of an evolution in how they're sort of policing things, going back to the detective we heard from earlier. Now, I think the man with the beard made some very interesting comments. Who are these managers and what do they represent? I think he said, and I go back to Peter's comment, they represent pseudo-intellectual claptrap.
Thank you. Sarah.
Can I just correct one misapprehension? Don't bother with non-crime hate incidents. They're fine. They're back in their box. They're subject to a parliamentary code of guidance. The police aren't bothering with them now. As I said before, they are recording you as committing a crime. Be worried about that. There are 2 things I think we need to do. The Home Office crime recording rules. I searched the document for mention of a freedom of speech, Article 10, that returned 0 results. So the police have to understand their lawful obligations pursuant to Article 10. The other thing, as Peter touched on, you get rid of perception-based hate crime recording. By all means, if somebody punches someone because they think they're gay or trans or whatever, lock them up. I'm not in favour of them walking the streets, but what has happened is this perception-based recording has allowed, frankly, the malicious and the mentally ill to hijack a system, and it seems that all the police energy is now put dealing with them. So those are two very simple things I'd do. Scrap perception-based reporting, rewrite the Home Office crime recording rules, because I'm told the police are very enthralled to those. You are judged, you are incentivised on how you deal with them. The crime recording rules at the moment say, believe the victim. They then go on to say, but investigate fairly. So it's like the Henriquez report never happened. The police just need to get back to their roots, and we need to end perception-based victim recording of crime.
Thanks, Sarah. Peter.
I'll deal with the question from the lady at the back who told us about the multicultural environment and community that you live in. And you said, how do you police the Jews and how do you police the Muslims? And I come back to my statement about you treat everybody evenly, victims and offenders. So it's such a simple process to go to the Muslim community, the Sikh community, the Hindu community, the non-believer community, the brown community, the white community, the black community. Break the law, and I've got a big shiny van outside, and I'll sling you in the back of it with pleasure. Abide by the law. Tell us if you hear something. We will protect you to the very best of our abilities. Ladies and gentlemen, and people of any other persuasion, that is policing.
Thank you.
I think this point about the use of the rule of law as a way of resisting these arguments is really important. But I know if I start talking about it, I will end up doing some pseudo-intellectual claptrap and it won't go anywhere. So I'm going to not talk about that, but it is extremely important. I think the point about what should a new government do, I'm not a member of Reform, but if they promised to do on day one a sort of Trump-esque bonfire of all anti-civil liberty statutes, binning the Malicious Communications Act, binning the Online Safety Act, reforming the Protection from Harassment Act so it doesn't target legitimate speech, reforming all and binning any law that criminalises speech. And if they talked about, we're getting rid of these laws, we're repealing them, and we're going back to traditional civil liberty, then they may just get my vote.
Does the panel think that police and crime commissioners are part of the problem, or could they be part of the solution?
I'm well aware of non-crime hate incidents and agree that they should go. I was not aware that you could have a crime recorded against your name, presumably a criminal record, not be convicted and not know about it. I'd be grateful if Sarah could expand on that. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Just a very quick point. I think if you need to affect change, then one of the things that you need to do is gather evidence, gather impartial, reliable evidence, and publish it in a central place that everyone could feed into that, so then that could be used. And I don't think we actually do that very well on two-tier policing.
It's just to say that I was travelling in Europe this summer, and spontaneously people did talk in France and in Germany about the difficulties that emulate ours in the same way. And I just want is a kind of fairly innocent question, actually. To what extent is our legislation about how policing is enforced, and how much has that to do with being part of the EACR?
How much does the panel think the College of Policing had an effect on the proliferation of laws that are related to identity and protected characteristics? And maybe do the panel think that we should start looking at the College of Policing, maybe disbanding it to start tackling the problem that we have with policing now?
It seems like online speech arrests have increased loads since 2019, but convictions have dropped. Have you got any views on that? And also in Panorama last week, there's a Panorama where some kind of officers were seen to be goaded into saying kind of some spicy stuff. Do you think this affects kind of recruitment, and does it contribute to any of the issues we're talking about today?
It's just a very quick one for Sarah. I know you've taken on your regulator, but hearing about that police officer who'd been taken off disciplinaries after 10 years,
Does he have a case for an abuse of process, or could he get damages for that?
Just wondering about a two-tier system in terms of MPs and everybody else, and thinking about the recent case of Michelle Mone, and if you have any thoughts around that.
Okay, panel, very welcome to respond to those questions, and kind of, if you could sort of respond, and then, is this possible to sum up at the same time, at the end, that'd be great. Luke?
Initially, I wanted to try and connect what we saw in that Charing Cross, the documentary about Charing Cross police station, in which police officers were filmed undercover saying some disgusting things. I think the way I understand what happened there is that this was a reaction against an environment. And I do wonder about the motivations of making that film, which was effectively to humiliate some people that said some terrible things. There was a time when that would have been dealt with privately. Those officers would have been disciplined and maybe sidelined from duty. In one respect, the documentary did a public service, but in another respect, it felt... I find it very difficult to not feel sympathy for the officers involved. And I'm trying to draw a connection between what you saw in those videos and the approach that a lot of officers take to their day-to-day job. And I think there is something in their demoralisation, their sense that they're not performing any kind of public duty or good. They're not receiving any thanks. It's a completely thankless task that they're involved with. And I speak to police officers a lot, and they say, who would become a police officer today when every element of your working day is subject to this kind of scrutiny? And then to top it off, the public have these conceptions, which are that the whole institution is racist, sexist, homophobic, etc. Who would join up? And I think that is a real problem. But just to finish with where I began, really, this has been a really inspiring discussion, because I think it has captured two distinct approaches to dealing with this problem. On the one hand, using the law and enforcing the law and making sure that these institutions perform their lawful role, but also, and I think perhaps just as important, if not more important, is empowering individuals to make their own stand when this sort of thing happens. And I think that has to then translate into, where possible, mass action to make sure that these jobs are done properly. And so, for example, we need to make sure that Maccabi Tel Aviv fans are able to attend a football match in Birmingham. And if they can't, the match does not proceed. And that's the end of the story.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you. I'll rattle through as many as I can, as quickly as I can. Police and crime commissioners came from somewhere at the back. An expensive, abject waste of money. Of course, they're political appointees who then get elected. Now, I am no towering intellect, as I'm sure you've gathered today. I left school at 16 with next to no qualifications, but I've had live debates with some of these police and crime commissioners in the media, on radio, on telly. And to be perfectly honest with you, I've rinsed them because some of them are as thick as the proverbial two short planks. Get rid of them, go back to the old accountable police authorities, local people that did have their van broken into the night before, people that came from those communities, people who cared about the communities. Bin them off. Reform if you're listening. Get rid of them if you get elected. Evidence gathering from a gentleman over here, very difficult. Policing's a disciplined service. The courageous sources that come forward and tell me who are still serving have to be very, very careful about lines of communications, because policing thinks I'm dangerous, but they tell me the truth, which allows me to speak often as an informed voice.
Thank you, Peter. Hardeep?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Peter on the crime commissioners. I'm not sure if they're part of the solution, but perhaps even part of the problem. There was a comment around the increase in online arrests, and it reminded me of a case. There's a sort of case. Some parents complained about their daughter's school on a WhatsApp group, and that kind of, for me, sort of sums up the petty, censorious sort of nature of policing today. And I think that case shows how ordinary people can be impacted so devastatingly with these sorts of issues. So, I mean, I'll sum up now, and I think everyone in this room needs to know their rights. They need to know the law. They need to perhaps meet up with Peter, Luke and Sarah for a Ribena. Keep hold of their business cards, get to know them, the people like this, and know what your rights are in the event you end up in one of these very tricky situations. Thank you very much. Sarah.
Thanks. I'll just deal with a specific question about non-crime hate incidents and crime and then try and sum up. We've got two very clear examples of where the police have stopped recording non-crime hate incidents because those are now subject to more detailed and articulate boundaries regarding Article 10 and common sense. It's Harry Miller and Helen Joyce. Harry Miller found out for writing an article in The Critic about the disgraced transvestite former police officer who'd been stalking him. That disgraced transvestite former police officer reported him for the crime of stalking, and so it was recorded. I'm not sure how Harry found out, but he got the information. Helen Joyce also was a victim of the same man, and it found out there had been recorded against her the crime of harassment. It said underneath there have been some evidential difficulties in proceedings, so we're not going to charge her. Remember, all this feeds into the recording of crimes as a statistic, so we cannot trust them. We have nothing to work with. It is disgraceful. I'm not quite sure what the case was about the police officer mentioned, but again, I go back to the fact that the courts don't appear to be captured. Legal fees are a huge problem, but crowdfunding has been a game changer. There are lawyers who will offer their services for free or a reduced rate. In an attempt to sum up, sadly, I'd hoped that Fair Cop could disband and have a party and retire. We can't. I think catch and kill is still needed, but what this discussion has shown me was the complete naivety of thinking that would sort it and the need to widen our ambitions. Yes, police crime commissioners are ineffective, but they have the power to sack chief constables. So while we've still got them, let's use them. I do like that suggestion of going out into the wider world, going to debates, going and meeting these people. Have an appointment with your local police and crime commissioner. Talk to them about this. They're elected, that they should listen to you. So clearly it was naive of me to think a couple of cases and we'd win, and we've got to widen it out and use everything at our disposal because the consequences, if we don't, are just far too serious.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. Thank you. You've been a brilliant audience. Some great points made. If you join with me in congratulating our panel, give them a big round of applause.